Hello, everyone, and welcome again to my YouTube channel. My name is Wumi Ajayi. I hope you're well. Today, I will carry on with the series that I'm on at the minute, talking about communication. This is communication part 3. If you've missed parts 1 and 2, please check them out on my YouTube channel. And I feel the need to talk about this because communication, as we know, is the lifeline of any relationship, and especially in our marriage relationships. And if we're going to make a success of marriage, we need to get better at communicating. And if we look at it as well, if you speak to a lot of married counselors, they'll tell you that most issues, most problems that their couples have, we can actually trace it back to lack of poor communication. So we all need to get better at communicating with one another. Today, I want to talk about some of the common errors that we make when it comes to communicating. And the first one is actually not talking. We can't talk about communicating when we're actually not communicating. There's so many reasons why people avoid talking or why people avoid communicating. But as we know, practice makes perfect. If we're avoiding talking to each other, for whatever reason that might be, then we're never going to get better at communicating. Because whether we talk or not, even when we think we're not communicating, we are communicating. Silence, like I said in my last video, is actually communicating. When we're not talking to each other, it can be, it can be interpreted as, well, I'm just ignoring you, I don't have time for you. Or actually, there's something else that's, I'd rather spend my attention, put my attention on. There's something else I'd rather be doing. And I spoke a lot about the detrimental effect that, gadgets especially can have on our communication. And that's one of the biggest reasons why couples don't communicate. We have to remember that our gadgets, your phone, your iPad, your laptop is not your spouse. And I'm not trying to say that, as couples, when we're together, we have to be talking 24/7. But we cannot afford to ignore the negative impact that a gadget and the internet can have on our communication. A study that was conducted with Gen Y and Gen Z shows an alarming picture in that people are becoming increasingly lonely, even people that are married. Some millennials are said to spend about 6.5 hours a day on social media. People have a lot of friends on social media, a lot of likes and hearts and emojis and all that. But in real life, people are still lonely. We have a culture now where people are more concerned about the strength of their Wi-Fi, the strength of their internet, rather than the strength of their relationships. And we cannot be such people. I am not saying that social media is outrightly bad, because I mean, without social media, I won't be speaking to you now. But we have to make sure that we take advantage of it and we do not ignore the detrimental effect that it can have on our communication. And this is not an attack on any generation in particular. All of us together, married couples, and even, people that are not married, in all our relationships, we have to be careful. We are created for social interaction, and it is fast becoming lost, especially in intimate relationships, and we cannot afford that. Another reason is when we avoid talking about sensitive topics, money, sex, in-laws. We avoid talking about them because they're sensitive, and we don't just want to deal with the emotions that comes with talking about them. But the truth about these topics are, the more we avoid talking about them, the more difficult it will be to talk about them. And the more we talk about them, the easier it becomes to talk about them. Another mistake we make is the mistake of assumption. An assumption is a thing that is accepted as true or as certain to have happened without proof. It means that we're believing things are certain ways when we actually don't have evidence to show that we are correct. It's actually said to be the lowest form of knowledge because it requires no intellectual skill, and it most often comes from a place of poor communication. We make assumptions because we don't have the courage to ask questions. We just assume, oh, okay, he said this because of that, he did this because of that. And the only way to avoid assumptions is to ask questions. Along the same line is mind reading. We think we know. We think we know, oh, what they're going to say. We think we know where they're going. We think we know what they mean. We can only know our thoughts. We can only know our opinions. We can only know our own ideas. Communication is actually about giving our spouse the chance to share theirs, to share their thoughts, to share their ideas, to share their opinions, rather than thinking that we know where they're going. Another mistake we make has to do with wrong timing. We talk about halt, HALT, hungry, angry, late, and tired. When someone is hungry or when they are angry or when they are late, they're rushing to an appointment or rushing to work or whatever, or when they are tired, especially late at, they've gone to work, they've come back, they're tired and all that, and it's time to go to bed. Those are not the times to be talking about important things. So we need to be careful. We need to be aware of what's going on with ourselves and with our spouses, so that we can time our conversations, our communications, especially important communications, so that we can time them right. Another one is not regulating our emotions. I spoke a lot about, using timeout in my last video. When we don't regulate, when we fail to regulate our emotions, it leads to all sorts of things. That's when we start shouting, yelling, screaming, name calling, and all that. We need to learn to regulate our emotions. And using timeout is a mature thing to do. It means that you're recognizing that, right, okay, the way this is going, we can't make a headway. I need some time out, and we can't continue with this conversation. I need to go and cool off. Let's come back. And when you use timeout, you have to remember to come back to the communication. Using timeout is not using, it's not avoiding communication. It means that you need timeout to regulate your emotions, so that you can talk rationally, so that you can communicate with your spouse rationally. Another error is when we play the blame game. We're reprimanding our spouses for their actions. When we do that, it just worsens the situation. When we blame our spouses, it's like we're playing the victim, and we're blaming the other person. We perpetuate, a cycle of aggression and rejection. It's important to communicate our feelings differently. We need to avoid using reproachful languages, and we need to focus on constructive dialogue instead. Because when we play the blame game, it leads to defensive reactions. If you blame them, then they want to defend themselves. And sometimes that leads to conflict escalating. The other one is criticizing, constantly highlighting their shortcomings. I mean, this used to be one of my biggest one in the past. I'm better now. It is a toxic approach that should be avoided. If we're going to have a healthy dialogue, a healthy communication with our spouses, we need to avoid constantly criticizing them, because it's like we are taking the high moral ground, and sometimes we end up giving them lectures, moral lectures and speeches and all that. This is not right, and it's not a suitable approach for intimate relationships like marriage. Trying to impose moral standards and criticizing the other person's behavior, it can lead to resistance and even transgression. It's important that we know that criticizing or preaching or taking the high moral ground doesn't lead to anything. It rarely leads to positive change in our spouses or in our relationships. Another error that we make is being judgmental. Sometimes we say things like, I told you so, especially after a negative event. What that does, it only fuels anger and frustration, because it implies that the other person didn't listen or they didn't value the advice. And sometimes it just exacerbates the situation. We shouldn't make remarks that makes our spouses feel blamed, or that can intensify any negative emotions that they're already feeling. Somebody that's already feeling bad, and then you're telling them, oh, I told you so, I knew that would happen. And it doesn't help our communication. Another error we make is hitting below the belt. When we do things like, we bring up topics that are sensitive to our spouses, we bring up, maybe mistakes that they've made in the past, their painful past issues to do with their family members. You say things about their mom, you say things about their dad, you say things that, this is what happens in your family. This is how your dad treated your mom. And when we bring things up, it doesn't help us at all. It doesn't help our communication, because bringing up that issues and hitting below the belt. It's like we're purposefully hurting our spouse. And when we do that, we're not going to get any good response out of them. Along the same line of that, another mistake is when we drag the past into the present, especially when we're trying to emphasize a pattern of offending. Oh, you did this, you did that last year, you did that 5 years ago, and now you do it. Sometimes we feel justified because, yes, I need to make you realize that you actually have a pattern to these offenses. All that this does is it makes our spouses feel bad, especially when in the past you have dealt with these issues. They've said they're genuinely sorry, they've apologized. Maybe, yes, maybe they've fallen short again, but trying to bring the past, drag the past into the present does not help us. The past is the past for a reason. It's important that we learn to leave the past where it belongs. And it's not just necessarily about, trying to establish a pattern of offending. There are some past as well that we bring into the present that doesn't help us. If it's in the past, let it be in the past. And sometimes it's because maybe we've not completely forgiven, or we've not recovered from whatever hurt in the past, and then we feel justified to bring it into the present. It doesn't help our communication. Another mistake we make is colored interpretation. And the nature, it's important to know that the nature of a relationship depends on how we interpret each other's intentions and actions during communication. And the way we interpret behaviors, people's actions and their intentions affect our reactions. And sometimes this can lead to, a cyclical cause and effect loop, because you're interpreting their action or their behavior or what they're saying based on a certain thing. I mean, a good example is where there's lack of trust. Where there's lack of trust, then there's suspicion. And so when your spouse is telling you something, you're likely it's likely to be colored. You're likely to not interpret it properly. And the way to overcome that is by having the way to break it is by having honest dialogue to clarify feelings and intentions. Is this what you mean? Are you saying this because of that? And if you're not sure, rather than assuming, rather than interpreting it based on what you think, then we need to clarify, we need to be asking questions. Another mistake we make is using sarcasm. Sarcasm is the caustic use of words. Often, in a joking way, in a humorous way, it's like you're trying to joke, but actually you're mocking. What you're doing through sarcasm is mocking the person. It is the use of words that mean the opposite of what you really want to say. And the intention often on sarcasm is to insult the person or to show your irritation or just to be funny, like I said. But most often, sarcasm is biting. Its intention is to cause pain. And so we need to be careful when we're using sarcasm. Is the person, are you actually, are you actually trying to be funny? And can your spouse see the funny side of your joke? So we need to be careful during our communication how we use sarcasm. The last point I want to talk about is about underestimating the power of the tongue, the power of words. And because this is a big one, and I feel very strongly about this as well, and it's going to be a long one, I'm going to do it in a separate video. So look out for part 4 of this series, which will be solely on talking about the power of the tongue. Remember, like I've been saying, it is only by communicating that we get better at communicating. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in my next video. God bless. Bye.